Well, it's time for another edition of Getting to Know Your Indiana Neighbor Sportscaster. Made the trip up to Indianapolis and talked to what I think is the person is one of the most brilliant and versatile announcers we have in the state of Indiana. His name is Greg Rakestraw. Greg Rakestraw. Maybe that name doesn't sound familiar to you, but his voice will. If you're a high school basketball fan at all, or a Colts fan, Indy 500 fan, you name it in the state of Indiana, he's been a part of it. You'll probably know the voice. If you watch the Indiana Pairing Show with Bob Lovell for basketball, football, baseball, doesn't matter, Greg Rakestraw is a part of that on the IHSAA Champions Network. He's called over 200 state finals, 200 state championship games across the various sports, and there are a lot of sports on the IHSAA network. If you listen to the Indianapolis Colts, no, he's not the play-by-play announcer, but if you listen after the game, the last 3 hours, he's the guy who takes the phone calls, the post-game show for the Indianapolis Colts. He's also at the Indianapolis 500, the post-game show he does for the Indianapolis 500. In my mind, he's brilliant. He's got a terrific mind. He's very innovative. And I think, as I said, I think he's one of the best sportscasters the state of Indiana has to offer at this point in time. Our next Getting to Know Your Indiana Neighbor broadcaster, here's Greg Rakestraw. Well, welcome to Getting to Know Your Indiana Neighbor. But as I mentioned before, a little project on the side for me here is Getting to Know Your Indiana Neighbor broadcaster. And today we got, I think, in my opinion, one of the best, if the best, broadcasters in the state of Indiana. And you might not even know his name down there in southern Indiana. By the way, I'm up here in the beautiful Emmis Communications Building on the Circle in downtown Indianapolis. Greg Rakestraw has invited me up after I asked for the invite. So, Greg, first of all, thank you so much for doing this.
Of course.
I know that you're a busy guy, and we'll talk about how busy you are. I think you're probably one of the most busiest people in the sport. But for those of you in southwestern Indiana, if you don't know the face, if you don't know the name, you know the voice. If you're a basketball fan at all, you've seen him on the state finals, countless events. Any idea, Greg, how many state final events you've done?
It's somewhere north of 200.
North of
at
200.
This point.
Yeah.
I had a count at one point in time, and I forget how many years ago it was. So if I went back and did all the state finals that I have done, because I do so many different sports, it'd be over 200 at this point.
And when you say different sports, tell me about all those different sports. Because we know basketball and baseball and volleyball down there.
Sure. So from my vantage point, from an IHSA standpoint, I have done broadcasts of soccer, volleyball, football. I'm doing these literally like chronological order of the year. Wrestling, basketball, baseball, and softball. So those are the ones that I have done from a state finals perspective. But I have done tennis, I have done track and field, I have done swimming over the course of the years. I've done auto racing. I'm sure there's stuff I'm leaving out off the top of my head, but I do a variety of sports.
So now you know the voice. You've heard the voice. And where you see Greg and hear him the most are on those IHSAA Network champion events, of course, but also on the Indiana Pairing Show, the basketball shows, baseball, football shows, along with Bob Lovell. Mm-hmm. How long have you been doing those?
So I've been doing the pairing shows. I've been the primary person doing the pairing shows really from about 2013, 2014 on at this point. The one pairing show that I still don't do on a regular basis is football, because that has been Bob Lovell and Paul Condrey that have done that for so long. But for the folks in Lagodi, you guys don't watch the football pairing show. So you see me on all the football pairing shows. I always make a point, by the way, because I also do a pairing show for unified flag football. That Lagodi is the only school that plays unified flag football that doesn't play traditional 11-man football. But from a basketball standpoint, and then there are pairing shows for tennis, for wrestling, for volleyball, for soccer, for baseball. I do all of those.
So I'll talk about those in a little bit, because that has to be a little bit chaotic. But we'll talk about that. I've got that as a subject. But just to help you out, anything that you might not have mentioned, Greg Rakestraw, that I've found, you also do the post-game show for Indianapolis Colts.
Correct.
So those of you listening to the Colts back home, most of you do. After the game, if you stick around and hear those crazy phone calls, he's answering them. I want to talk to you a little bit about that as well. That could be interesting, I'm sure.
Yep.
The Indy 11 soccer. Now, soccer is growing a little bit in southwestern Indiana. Lagodi doesn't have a team yet, but you also you're the voice of the Indy 11 soccer team. Tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So the Indy 11 have now been around for 9 years. And again, for some of you in Lagodi that might look more towards Louisville as kind of the largest market closer to you, if you're familiar with Lou City that have the men and women's team, Indy plays in the same league as the Louisville men do. So it's called the USL Championship. It is basically the second division of American professional soccer, the level below Major League Soccer. And the Indy 11 have been in the news over the last few days because of the announcement of a brand new stadium. They've been working on this for the last several years. It's going to be just west of Lucas Oil, going to be just south of Victory Field. We'll have seats for about 20,000. It'll be part of a office, apartment, residential, business complex. One is the side of the old Diamond Chain Factory off Kentucky Avenue and just to the west of West Street, kind of your parameters of downtown Indianapolis. So I have been the voice of the Indy 11 on television, matches on ESPN Plus, on My Indy TV locally. Do about 20 of those matches a year and have been doing that since day one in 2014.
All right, so you're a good old boy from southern Indiana.
Correct.
Lanesville.
Correct. And my mom, every time Lanesville qualifies for the regional and they go to the Jack Butcher Arena, I get a phone call when she can get cell service out of the building. Same issue in Lanesville, too. She'll go, "Is this a 1A school?" "Yes, Mom, this is a 1A school." They happen to have a 4,700-seat arena because you find folks support basketball so well in our shared neck of the woods.
Well, Lanesville certainly had their share of success in baseball, girls basketball for sure.
Yep.
But I know you're a proud Lanesville alum, so if you're like us in Lagodi, you didn't know anything about soccer growing up, did you?
No. So, in fact, there was not a high school soccer team, not just at Lanesville, but in Harrison County. However, I'm a graduate of 1994 from Lanesville, and 1994 was the year the World Cup, was in the United States, and that was kind of my first prolonged exposure to the sport. And then I get to college. Not only is my roommate a soccer player, but several of the guys on my floor were soccer players. I was a tennis player at UIndy, and I'll bring up a name from my era that I'm sure folks in Lagodi will remember. The Steimel twins that played at Washington Catholic. They were part of Mike Adams' undefeated team of the semi-state in 91. I was teammates with Blaine and Shane Steimel. They were tennis players at UIndy. They were also soccer players at UIndy.
I did not know that.
So, in fact, of my 9-man tennis roster, my first year on campus, 94-95, 3 of the guys were soccer players in the fall and tennis players in the spring, which meant I got to play a much higher level of tennis in the fall than when those 3 guys came back and played in the spring. So I was just kind of around the soccer guys. And when the soccer team came to town, in part because of doing some IHSA champion stuff, in part because of doing some college matches in the area, I was really kind of the only guy that did soccer play-by-play on television locally. I kind of got the job by default. So apparently I figured some things out because they've not fired me in the 9 years.
Do you still learn on the fly about soccer, or are you pretty adept?
I think I'm pretty adept at this point. I think, though, the best thing for me on that, and I think is what makes it work so well, is I try to broadcast it more to the people that are novices. I try to, think of the revival tent, bring in as many people as you possibly can. And so I know enough to keep the soccer nerds happy, but I don't try to broadcast over the heads of those that are very casual to the sport. And so I think I can translate to both audiences.
I remember, Greg, we were at Forest Park High School one time and watching a basketball game, but the IU soccer team was moving forward. And even though we don't know soccer, we still had an interest. It's IU,
Sure.
right? Well, somebody asked what the score is, and I remember saying, well, it's probably 1-0. And the Forest Park person turned around and looked at me because I was saying that as if, well, they're all 1-0.
Right.
They're not exciting. They didn't like that too well. But even that, by watching my grandson's soccer league, he's 10 years old, 1-0 can be pretty exciting.
There are times when 0-0, nothing, is boring as all get out. And there are times when 0-0 is fascinating. I have had both ends of that spectrum. Seemingly our team with the Indy 11 this year can score goals. We have problems stopping the breeze at this point. We've played a pair of 4-3 matches in the month of June. That is very atypical in the history of the Indy 11, but it's just seemingly how this team is built. So if you're more into the Goal Fest, watch the Indy 11 this year because that's kind of how we've been playing all
Do you
year.
travel with them?
So I do every home match. We do selected road matches, but even before the pandemic, we have done those from studios here.
Mm-hmm.
So, like for example, I'll work in both topics we've talked about so far. Friday night of Father's Day weekend, I did the 2A and 3A baseball state championship games from Victory Field. I didn't do any of the games on Saturday on radio or television because I had Indy 11 that night. The Indy 11 were playing in Colorado Springs at 9 o'clock. I did that game from studios at 65th and Binford here in Indianapolis.
Well traveled, but not well traveled at
Exactly.
all. Right?
And before I had kids, my kids are now 11 and 7. I would have thought that was the worst thing ever. I'm like, hey, I want to be there. I want to be able to experience. I enjoy the travel, and I've done a lot of travel in my career doing this. Now that I've got kids, the ability to do that from a studio, and even if I'm not tucking them into bed that night, they see me the next morning. The greatest thing ever.
Unbelievable. Even 10 years ago, you couldn't even have fathomed.
No, absolutely. The first remote broadcast we did like that was 7 years ago, and that was kind of cutting edge. I remember it was the one road match we did in 2015, second year of the team, and it was almost more of a test pilot. Say, hey, can we do this? And we did it from the stadium because the studio wasn't ready yet. We did it from like an Indy 11 suite. We like moved signage around to have like our backdrop, the whole 9 yards, and you're basically calling the match off of what you would see on television. Yeah. Specifically as it relates to soccer, if they stop, assume the offside flag went up. That was the reason why activity stopped. You learn quickly how to adapt in other sports. So again, for example, in the month of May, I did the Horizon League softball and baseball championships on ESPN Plus. Again, those events were played in Youngstown, Ohio, and Dayton, Ohio. I did them from the exact same studio at 65th and Binford. And you just get used to kind of saying, okay, this is where the ball went. You got to wait, for the camera to kind of pick things up. Oftentimes when I'm doing those, not necessarily in our soccer broadcast, but for example, in softball, I had what was called a confidence shot. They basically put a camera where my eyes would normally be in the press box. So I could go to that if I thought it was quicker than watching the program feed in terms of the director cutting from shot to shot. Sometimes you'll also get, I do a lot of 4-camera productions. And there are some times when, like, again, facilities, as you well know, going to do baseball or softball, sometimes there's room for you in the press box. Sometimes there's not. And you're on a card table behind home plate. And you have to be cognizant of, the umpire and the kid batting are going to hear me as I'm broadcasting the game. Well, from a television standpoint, that sometimes means we are doing the game from the truck. In other words, the production truck's maybe 50 to 100 to 150 feet away from the actual game action. And sometimes I'm in that truck calling the game. And what I will get is I'll get the program feed, which is what you're watching, of this, for example, right now. Then I'll get a separate monitor that has basically all 4 cameras that we are shooting. And where that really helps me is oftentimes if there's runners on the base paths, I'll be able to see how big of a lead the runner has on a particular base, even though you're not seeing that on the program feed. But I have the ability to do that. So yeah. little tech nerd talk for you.
It is. It's way over my head. Because I would think if there's a fly ball to the left, there's a fly ball, but you don't know where it's going. But you have the access to know where that's going.
Either I can see it with all 4 cameras, and normally in a 4-camera setup for baseball or softball, the camera behind home plate is going to follow the ball. So you are used to watching the camera in center field. That is the pitcher, batter, catcher, umpire shot that we've all kind of grown up with and are accustomed to. But then I can quickly then go to either the second camera, or if my director's really good, and most of the guys I work with are, as I'm thinking it, they will punch up on the main screen and I am following the ball. So sometimes there is a hesitation just for a split second. Fly ball, stop. Left field, because now you can kind of see it and you're describing the action and you're watching the way you normally would.
Do you always have somebody in your ear?
When it comes to those broadcasts, yes.
How challenging? To me, that you'd have to get used to it.
Again, you get used to it, and oftentimes when it's a 2-man broadcast, the director producer will try to get in your ear a minimal amount. but B, they'll do it while the other guy is talking. So normally there's a separate talkback. There's a button. I'm talking to the play-by-play guy. I'm talking to the color guy. Color guy is making a point. Director's in my ear. Hey, we need to get to this read or this sponsor. And again, let's use the soccer example. You know, you don't break for 45, 50 minutes in a soccer match, but you see graphics on screen. If you watch an 11 broadcast, I usually do about 15 reads in the span of about 45 or 50 minutes. And sometimes I know, hey, if I see this sponsor, I need to get to this read. You know, the clock, we call them the clock grabs. And so I will do that basically without being prompted. But then there are other sponsors that, again, it can't be just me reading it and then the crew reacting to it. If the director leads, then the graphics guy knows, hey, we're going to do this read for Select, the soccer ball sponsor of the USL Championship. Hey, give me Select read, next stoppage in play. And they know that in the next 30 to 60 to 90 seconds, hey, Select Sport America is the official soccer ball, the USL Championship. They've been providing soccer balls since 1947, blah, 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 blah. You get the idea.
Yeah. So WRZR, I'm fine. I'm staying there. I'm not smart enough to do what he does. Not going anywhere. Also, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. I mean, you do coverage with the Indy 500 in the month of May.
Yeah, so
it's going to be exciting.
So the place we're doing this interview now is the MS Communications headquarters, and which is for those of you that follow JMV, Mr. Greene County, Dan Dockich, et cetera, 107.5 The Fan. A lot of the work that I do for The Fan at this point as a freelancer, used to be here full time, but in the month of May, you hear my voice a lot on the radio just because I have a knowledge and a passion for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, for the IndyCar Series, having covered it now for the better part of 25 years. So I'll do track updates during the week of practice. I'll do a lot of qualifications, shows, and coverage and play-by-play. I also do PA work at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So on race day, the bomb goes off at 6 a.m. I'm the second voice you hear on the PA system. Michael Young is my partner. As I joke, we're the JV team. We get the morning shifts. Dave Calabro, Alan Bestwick are the guys that are on PA during the course of the race. Michael then goes out to turn 2 and works for the radio network. I go to a next building over. During the race, I get to kind of just hang out, watch the race, etc. Then, much like the Colts, I do 3 hours of post-race coverage on The Fan, and it's the biggest captive audience I broadcast to the entire year because there are 300,000 people trying to exit the facility, That's right. And the one local show that is talking about the race is led by this yahoo yapping at you right now. Yeah. So yeah, that is my split doubleheader on race day. 5 hours in the PA booth as people are getting in, and then 3 hours on radio as people are trying to leave and get away from me as quickly as possible.
You talked about all of the high-tech broadcasting that's going on now.
Sure.
Tell me about the most low-tech because I'm sure back in the day, you're just like us. Yeah.
You've been here.
I've been there.
So, unfortunately tonight, folks, our phone line didn't work here at Insert High School here. So my name is Greg Rakestraw, joined by Greg Bateman. Greg, your thoughts about the game?
Well,
and back and forth, and here we go.
Yeah. Yes. Well, I've had to do that. We've had to do that. Yep. It's even possible today, folks, for myself and Coach Wagner to have to do that. It's been a while, but but also when you're at places that don't have internet access.
Right.
I mean, now it's.
And from a television standpoint,
you can still have a phone line,
right?
Those types
right. Right. From a radio standpoint, you go that route. From a television standpoint, no. And it's amazing how we talk about high tech, but still how accessible or portable the technology is. So when you have gone to games in the past, let's say you're going to an IU game, like if you're entering from the west side, the football side of the stadium, you would see this huge television production truck with this huge satellite attached to it. And a lot of larger productions still go that way. The television that I do with ISC, even like the live stuff that we do to get to Comcast, like for example, the HBCA All-Star Game from Bar Reeve on April the 3rd. I actually did that from studios in Mulberry. We had 2 camera guys there.
Now where's Mulberry? I see that as the address for MS Communications.
So MS is downtown Indianapolis.
Or ISC.
ISC is in Mulberry, which is Clinton Prairie High School, which is about 15 miles southeast of Lafayette. So I did that from our studios there. But for example, and we had what I call the Comcast bag. It is basically a backpack. It is bonded cellular cards, but you can also then plug into an Ethernet. And if we have 15 megabits per second of an upload speed, I can send an HD television signal wherever I want. And so when I do games on Comcast 81 across the state, when I do a lot of high school games locally on the My Network station, My Indy TV 23, it used to be we'd have like a live truck or a satellite truck, and now it is a backpack that basically gets us live to television to 1 million homes across the state.
So you're telling me if I had a camera down at Bar Eve High School, I might not even have to travel the 7 miles to get there and do a broadcast?
If for some reason you didn't want to, potentially walk to Bar Eve High School on the Viking ship, yes, you could do that, because we have done the HBCA All-Star Game from Bar Eve the last couple of years. April of 2021, we took the entire van and we did a 3-camera production from Montgomery. This past year, we sent 2 camera operators down to Bar Eve, and then our 2 guys behind the scenes and our 2 broadcasters, myself and Pete Smith, called that from our studios in Mulberry.
So if I'm watching this and I'm saying, I'm going to go down there and say hi to Greg Rakestraw.
You always ask me to make sure I'm there. It's from a high school standpoint, it's rare that we do it, but it does happen. So I'll let you know before next year's game in April when I'm going to be there or not.
All right. Appreciate that. Boyhood Idol. Let me ask you, where did you get your sports passion? Then go into Boyhood Idol.
Sure.
But obviously, you're a junkie, right?
Correct. I knew from the age of 5 what I wanted to do.
Okay.
And that was be a sportscaster. In my mind, that was going to be, on television. And so, in other words, the guy that gave the sports at 11 o'clock every night. And growing up in Harrison County, that was watching the Louisville television stations.
Right.
So guys like Bob Dominic on Channel 3, Dave Conrad on Channel 11. A little bit later on, but a guy that is still there, Fred Cowgill from WLKY TV 32. And it's funny, he walked into this building a handful of years ago. The last time, I guess it wasn't 2021 where all the games were played here, but 17 or 18, something along those lines, they needed a studio to interview somebody. He walks in and I just kind of smile and I go, don't need to introduce yourself to me. I said, here's who I am. Here's where I'm from. Trust me, I know who you are. How can I help? And so my dad was actually a volunteer firefighter, which meant that I got to go once a year to the Crusade for Children at WHAS and got to meet guys like Paul Rogers, et cetera, and things like that from Channel 11 back in the day. I always had a voice that projected. I'm sure it was planted in my mind. Hey, you need to be an announcer. You have an announcer's voice. I'm 3 or 4 years old. And so that's where it started. And played whatever sports at Lanesville I could. But, career fairs for me in high school were a waste of time. I'm like, I'm going to be a broadcaster. I know exactly what I'm going to be doing. And so at a small school, there's not a campus radio station. The newspaper was something I printed and kind of looked like that. But you found ways to get behind a microphone or get experience and pick a college where, hey, I want to be in radio and television. And that's kind of how it played out.
So I didn't have the voice like you, but I'm guessing though that you were much like me, that if there was a pickup game going on, you might have been announcing that pickup
game.
Here's
the story for me. So we moved into a new house out in the country. So I lived in the Lanesville School District, which was one township, Franklin Township, but had a Corden address. Like literally, I can see the dividing line from where we lived for the Corden and Lanesville School District. Only child. I am the only child of my mom and dad's second marriage. I have an older half sister from my dad's first marriage, but largely grew up as an only child. Had an unfinished basement. So you know what's coming.
Playground.
You know what's coming, exactly. So I would draw. My mom just sold the house, and then last year there were marker lines in the basement where I would draw the court, the targets on the wall. Even applied to my college sport. And I'll explain in a minute. So I would play the games solo and announce the games. I would be the PA announcer to announce the lineups. Yeah. I'd be the radio play-by-play guy describing the action. And then I would go down and hit tennis balls against the wall. And that's how I learned I have a slice backhand. And I learned that to not get up into the rafters of the 8 or 9 foot basement, ceiling that we have. And so that was where my time was spent, because there was one neighbor kid that was about 5 years older than me. And we would hang out and play pickup basketball when he was, we didn't farm, he did. We were in the middle of farmland. And so we would play pickup hoops all the time at our place because he didn't have a goal at their farm. But then when it was just me, I'm down in that basement shooting hoops, playing football, or legitimately hitting a tennis ball for the tennis racket off the wall, or teeing it up and taking my baseball swings So not surprisingly, baseball and tennis were my two best sports growing up.
So now you see why these type of editions of broadcasters are for me. Maybe not so much you, but they're for me because we have so much in common. I mean, when you have that passion for sports and later broadcasting,
Yep.
those are the things you do as a young child. I remember in the basement, you'd have milk cartons, right? And you'd cut out the bottom, top, whatever, and you would have a sock rolled up. And
Right.
maybe you didn't. You were a little more high tech in the 90s. But if I would have heard maybe a state finals basketball game on the radio, I would immediately go play that game by myself, and I would have names that I would make up, make up the names. Now I would keep the last names,
Right.
but I would make up first names. I didn't want to steal from anybody.
Right.
But it sounds like so similar. Right?
Very similar. Yeah, very similar.
So who were your idols growing up?
I met some of the guys from a local standpoint. Al Michaels' career has basically spanned my life, and so Al's a guy that I looked up to. But the other names, it was funny. Now I know Don Fisher and consider him a friend. I grew up listening to him, but at the same time, I was actually a University of Louisville fan growing up. Now that has since kind of gone away. I learned that lesson when Butler beat Louisville in like 03 in the second round of the NCAA tournament. I'm rooting for Butler because I know people, that are playing in the game. I'm like, okay, the boyhood.
Well, you
fan
grew up
days are gone.
so close
exactly.
to Louisville.
And I grew up at such a time where, IU won the championship in 81, Louisville won it, in 80, Louisville won it in 86, IU won it in 87. The first dream game's not a big deal that U of L and UK play. I remember I was like 6 when they played for the first time in 25 years in the NCAA tournament, how huge of a deal that thing was. So U of L was my team, but I bring it up in the crux of this conversation because Van Vance, University of Louisville, Kaywood Ledford, University of Kentucky, because I listened to so many basketball and football games on 84 WHAS because of how strong that signal is. You could, if you're out driving wherever you were going to be able to hear those games. And so from a play-by-play standpoint, those are two of the names that immediately, come to mind.
Yeah. For me, I grew up the tail end of Harry Carey in St. Louis.
Sure.
So I was Harry Carey.
Right.
And then it was Jack Buck, and there was nobody better for me.
Of course,
than Jack Buck. Had the opportunity to meet him. I know you've met your idols, you've worked with them, your friends. Jack Buck was never a friend of mine.
Yep.
But one time I was in St. Louis, happened to be on the elevator with him, I believe, because I had a press pass.
Yeah.
Jack Buck. And I said, Mr. Buck, could I get a picture? No. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, come here, kid. Put his arm around me. And I have that picture displayed probably before my daughter's picture, probably in front of that. But that's how much we grew up with that passion for sportscasting. So you get into it. You graduate from Lanesville. You go to UIndy.
Yep.
You get your first job at WNDE.
Correct.
Right? I remember that.
Yep.
So what were you, a DJ?
So I got that job when I was 19. I was still in college at the time, and I had applied, I think, when I was a freshman. And the program director for WNDE, Pam Farron, had spoken to a class I was in as a freshman. I have no idea how she got a hold of me, but I get a phone call at the tail end of my sophomore year. Hey, we have a part-time opening. Now, again, you can explain this as well, but this is in the days before automation, where there is somebody in a radio studio 24/7, 365.
Odd concept.
Right. So my first job at WNDE was working Sunday morning 6A to 10A and Saturday afternoons 2P to 7P. And at the time, if you could walk and chew gum, they asked you to do sports report every 20 or 30 minutes. And I was board opping baseball on Saturday afternoons and just giving sports reports on Sunday mornings. And I had experience running a board, this thing you see behind me, from my freshman and sophomore year at the University of Annapolis. And at that point in time, I had been doing, play-by-play for basketball, football, baseball, and stuff. And had done some on-air sports reports as well as part of that. So started there with 2 years left to go in my college days, and got very lucky. Started doing more shifts there around my tennis schedule and broadcasting schedule at UIndy, and got offered a full-time job a month before I graduated from college. And so I never had to go do, kind of do the small town radio thing and then try to work my way back to the big city. I was working at WNDE full-time. In fact, I actually had to drop a few classes and come back and pick them up in the summer to go take this job. But everybody around me knew hey, this is a monumental opportunity. You can't pass this up. I was producing and kind of a third voice on the daily afternoon sports talk show in Indianapolis at the age of 21.
Wow.
You have to take that.
Yeah.
So I did that. So yeah, I was there part time. Also worked at the rock station, X103. Literally, that started because I was working the 2 to 7 shift at 1260, and a guy that's part of the Bob and Tom show, legendary voice locally named Ace Cosby, kid, somebody didn't show up at X103. You want to come run the board? And I'm like, yes. I realized the opportunity, and this was 3 hours of actually doing some on-air DJ stuff and 2 hours of producing a show. And I cracked the microphone and go, hi, you don't know who I am. I know how to talk into one of these. This is the next song coming up back after this. And because like the program director was out of town, it was a summer Saturday night. Yeah. People had scattered to the four winds. They were impressed with that. I got a regular weekend gig at X103 in addition to working at 1260. And as I joke with people, I did that for about 3 or 4 years. That was my ego shift. Because if I say somebody says, hey, you work at the Fan, right? Yes. Sports fans in the area know that. 25, 30 years ago, you work at WNDE, only sports station in town. People of my age like, what? I work at X103. Oh, really? So I would call those my Saturday and Sunday morning ego shifts. Yeah. That I could tell people, hey, I work at X. Yeah. Can you give me concert tickets? Maybe. And there we go.
Very, very similar. I mean, it's unbelievable. I was 19 and I worked at WFML in Washington, Indiana. Yeah. And I was in college, and so I just worked Saturday. It was on the AM side, so sun up to sundown.
Yep.
That's all they were on the air, sun up to sundown. Had one DJ, and that was me. And I remember I had the goal one time to go to the owner and say, sun up to sundown's a long time. Is there any way you can give me some help? Well, needless to say, I didn't get any help.
Yep.
But then I had one of those ego ones too in college, maybe 20, 21 years old, and that was WPFR in Terre Haute.
Yep.
And I did work there, but most of the time I worked at the little WAAC, which is their AM station.
Yeah.
And I'd tell people I worked at WPFR.
Sure, of course.
And I did sports there a little bit, but it's amazing. I don't know, 30 years apart. No, not that long. You're not that much younger than
20,
me.
20
yeah,
maybe.
Maybe. Not even that, Greg.
Yeah,
just to let you know that. Yeah. But it is me. So did you ever use a different name other than Greg Rakestraw?
No, and I had thought about it. And I was going to go with my middle name and my full first name. Like when I'm mad, Mom still calls me Gregory. I was going to go with Lance Gregory. Great sounding radio name, right?
It is.
We're in Indianapolis.
Somebody has it.
The Gregory family dynasty is in weather forecasting. Bob Gregory worked for WTHR for 30, 40 years. Yeah. His son Kevin has been the lead meteorologist for Channel 6 for going on 30 years. So I'm like, funny thing is, I know Bob and Kevin. They're great people. I'm sure they would have loved to have adopted me as part of their family. But my career kind of happened so fast by Greg Rakestraw. So yes, that is not a radio name. That is my actual name. And I was very happy that as my career kind of status grew, Mom and Dad could go, yeah, that's my son. Yeah, he's out there accomplishing something.
Yeah. Is Bob Gregory still around?
Bob Gregory is still with us. He's been off the air for 15, 20 years now, but Bob is still with us.
Now, most of you wouldn't know Bob Gregory, first of all, because you're not that old, but was it WTHR? What station was he?
Channel 13.
Channel 13 here in Indianapolis. So we really didn't get that back home, but in places I lived, we were able to watch it, and he was great, Bob Gregory.
Yep.
Again, and you're used to interviews when you see me interjecting my experiences, but remember, this is just conversation.
Right.
So I just, again, to parallel, my name's Greg, right?
Yep.
When I was at Fort Wayne, I worked at a station, I think it was WEZV. Well, the big one in Fort Wayne was WOWO, of course. Big, booming AM. Yep. And that's where I wanted to work.
Right.
Really.
Heard in 30 states.
Yeah. It was a big time station.
Yep.
So I got hired on there on Sunday mornings and worked at both stations.
Yep.
Well, I didn't want to have my name in both stations. So it was Greg Bateman at one.
Yep.
And I used my middle name at WOWO, which is Perry. So I was Greg Perry on Sunday mornings. And through the week, I was Greg Bateman. And I didn't last long at WOWO. But anyway, it's just interesting because Rakestraw, like Bateman, isn't a name that flows off the tongue.
Bateman's pretty good. It's better than Rakestraw.
It might be a little better than Rakestraw. Yeah. Not much, but it's not a Hollywood name, right?
I would say, I think it's Jason Bateman. It is a Hollywood name.
No, I meant Rakestraw. Yeah. How many Rakestraws do you know?
The funny thing is that when you have a unique last name, it's easy to tell people your email address. So you can all email me now, first name, last name at gmail.com.
Yeah, there you go.
But the other thing is, I am probably 4 or 5 weeks into being a student at UIndy in '94, and I may have been going a little fast up US 31. And I give the guy my ID. He goes, "You know a Jeff Rakestraw?" And I go, "Man, I wish I did." Well, the funny thing is, later, about 10 years later, I met Jeff Rakestraw. And Jeff worked, he's retired now, in the Marion County Sheriff's Department. And I see that I'm in Hinkle getting ready for either a regional or a semi-state game. And I see this large gentleman walking my way, distinctly walking towards me. And I'm like, uh-oh. And he gets about 10 feet away, and I see the badge, and I go, "Let me guess. You get asked about me all the time." He goes, "You have no idea."
That's funny. That's funny. Most people, if you know radio at all, it would be rare that you just jump into it and become a Greg Rakestraw like he is now. And I know you didn't either. 20 years here in this market or
Yep.
so. And you had a sports radio show, sports talk show in Franklin. Is that right?
Correct.
So I did too in
Yeah.
Terre Haute. So I know. Now, in Terre Haute, here's my sports talk show. I would say, okay, you can call in at this number. Number one, I get the same guy
Oh, yeah.
every day,
Right.
whatever it was, or wrong number because you're just picking it up.
Of course.
But you've had to have some experiences like that early on.
Yeah, I mean, at first, I was hosting the show and running the board at the early days on 95.9, right as they went to a news talk format in Franklin. And I went to him and said, "Hey," I said, "I have to have a producer." I said, "I'm going to do as many interviews as possible, but to be able to get the interviews and things of that nature," I said, "you've got to get me a producer. Even if that means you're not paying me, pay this kid $8 an hour to answer the phones and run the board so I can focus on doing the show." And so that's kind of largely how that started. I did that show for the first 6 months without getting paid. Just because I knew the opportunity. I could host my own talk show. I was 23 years of age. And I'm like, listen, and it was weeknights. It was around my play-by-play schedule, which I was getting paid for. So I'm like, listen, I will do this around this schedule. I'll sell into it. We'll figure something out, but give me the airtime. Basically handed me 2 hours. That's all you need.
Yeah.
And so it was a wonderful breeding ground, because then a couple of years later, that then led to, hey, we're not sure what we're going to do with this AM frequency. After 9/11, it was a pay-per-play frequency. Donations were down because of concerns about the economy, and I kind of piped up and I said, "Listen, I have connections at ESPN Radio because I worked for a former ESPN affiliate. The affiliate relations director in the small world we live in is a graduate of Southridge High School in Indiana University. His name is Jeff Martindale." And you know Jeff, right?
What, was he not the athletic director or no? Maybe I'm wrong.
No.
Okay.
No.
Don't know Jeff then.
Yeah.
I know Wink Martindale.
Jeff, I know Wink too, as in Tic Tac Doe, and the defensive coordinator, student for Wink Martindale. Jeff actually worked at QTY.
QTY Linton.
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
For a while.
QT.
So,
Yeah.
Exactly. So that was where he kind of got his start in radio. Anyway, as we veer crazily off the road on this conversation, I said, I think I can land as ESPN Radio with a couple of phone calls. I had like 5 heads in the meeting turn. Are you serious? Yeah. Hey, you guys are getting squeezed on airtime, right? Yeah. What if I gave you 21 hours a day on a 5,000 watt daytime AM stick? Okay. Send the paperwork. All right, great. Thanks. Within a month of that conversation, I was hosting a daytime, drive time sports talk radio show. Ironically enough, from a building, as I point, you can't see it off camera, that is next to the building that we're in now on Monument Circle. And I am hosting a daytime afternoon drive talk show in the city of Indianapolis, and I am 25 years of age.
See, now our similarities end right there. First of all, when I was 21 years old and working, I couldn't spell the word producer, much less want one. Right? Didn't know what they did.
Right.
As far as focus is concerned, who focused? You just answered the phone and let them talk. But yeah, so that's why he's where he is. But that's very interesting, though. And then in radio, if you're going to make it, there has to be continuous progression. And you have had very, I guess, an innovative career. You're very innovative. Hometown sports.
Yep.
But I'm going to talk about, though, the Fan.
Yeah.
Most people have heard of ESPN, the Fan. As you said, Dan Dockich and others, JMV. But you were program director?
Correct. So I'll try to summarize some steps in the way there. So When I was at 1260, when I first started, we eventually became the home for ESPN Radio. When I went to 950 after 95.9 in Franklin, I took ESPN Radio with me. We held on to ESPN Radio for about 5.5 years on 950. But the place that we lost it to was the building we're in now, MS Communications, which is the Fan. The Fan is what originally what was on historically 1070 WIBC, which was the historic flagship news, talk, and sports. In the industry, we call it full service radio station. The best example I can give you of that in our shared area, WITZ in Jasper. Now they have kept their music format longer than hardly anybody else would, but there's so much news, so much community programming, so much sports. 1070 was like that for basically about 70 years,
including traffic. Big John Gillis,
exactly, legend, the late Big John Gillis. Well, by about 2005, 2006, the idea was, hey, there are more talk stations starting to migrate over to FM. And there was two 50,000 watt radio stations in the building with 93.1 and 97.1. So the idea was, hey, let's take the WIBC format of news, talk, and let's take some sports like IU basketball or the Indiana Pacers with us to 93 WIBC. But we've got all these sports properties, as in the home of the Colts, the home of IU hoops, the home of the Indiana Pacers, the home of the Indianapolis 500, the home of IHSA state championships. That's enough to really build a sports talk station on. So from 1990 through 2002, there was one sports talk radio station in town, 1260 WNBE. 950 entered the market and made it two from 2002 through 2007. Start of 2008, now there's three. Now there's the Fan. Now there's 1070 the Fan. And at that point in time, it became much tougher for us at 950 to compete, just because we could hold off 1260. We couldn't hold off the home of the Colts, the Pacers, Indiana, et cetera, and losing ESPN radio. So at 950, they kept the sports talk format till like really 2012. But, you know, I was there from 2008 to about May of 2009. I came back, I went to television full time, freelance for a couple of years. The job that I wanted on the Fan was not as a talk show host. I had did that at 950 really for 7 years. The job that I wanted was the program director, you know, was the guy that ran the day-to-day operation, oversaw everything. And that opportunity presented itself in April of 2013. And so I was full-time in this building for 5 years. I was the program director of the Fan for about 3.5 years. I ran Network Indiana for a couple of years. That overlapped a little bit with Fan and Network Indiana. Then I ran Network Indiana for about 18 months or so. And that was my entree into this building. And so I have had a key card / parking pass here for about 10 years.
Good for you.
But five years of that was full time.
So let me get this straight. You had control over the content of the Dan Dockett show.
No one has control of the content of the Dan Dockett show. I was technically responsible for the Dan Dockett show, but nobody has control over that.
Did you get the complaints?
All the freaking time. Yes.
And the praises, you know, but
mostly the complaints. Yes.
So for our fans, and you can lie if you want, I don't care. But but describe Dan Dockett.
A different person off the air than he is on the air.
Okay.
You know,
that helps.
The volume is turned down significantly. Tremendously passionate. He is kind of directed seemingly more towards politics these days as much as he is sports. But from a sports standpoint, amazingly knowledgeable, a tremendous interviewer, a fantastic Rolodex, and a person that does not suffer fools, or who he believes to be fools, is maybe the best way to put it.
So fantastic Rolodex. What about yourself, the most famous person you've considered that you've interviewed?
You know, Peyton Manning, you know, would be up there. I'll tell you the two people that I got nervous about meeting or interviewing for the first time. It wouldn't be that way now. But again, going back to my days as a kid, Danny Sullivan from Louisville, winner of the '85 Indianapolis 500. And this was 15, 16 years later. I had him on, but I joked with him. I said, dude, I had a poster of you, like, you know, in my bedroom, because you were a big deal locally, you know, but because of that. And then the other one is Damon Bailey. And now Damon's a buddy. Now, you know, I've known Damon now for 20 years, and broadcast. I saw Damon at St. Francis in Marion doing a game of theirs in February because his son Brayton plays at St. Francis. His daughter Alexa played at Butler and UIndy. So I know Damon. I know Stacy. I know the family.
We're working on getting Damon.
Very cool.
But we're not working hard enough.
I'll give you his phone number on that, by the way,
thank you very
too.
much.
You're
Appreciate
welcome. And so I because I'm 4 years behind Damon in school.
Yeah.
So I tell people, I say, you would see your schedule, you'd see the BNL schedule, you'd cross off the dates in the BNL schedule where your team was playing, and then you go, okay, of the road games, where's the best chance I think I have to get a ticket, to watch him play. And so talking to him was nerve wracking. Yeah,
Really?
Yeah, but again, it's not now.
Yeah. What type of interview was he? Because I'm thinking if I do him, he's very serious.
Yep.
He's not you and I having a great conversation.
Sure.
Might be a little bit different.
No, but he opens up.
Does he?
Absolutely. Okay. And again, now he's a buddy. So, and we talk about Dan Dockage frequently when we have conversations because of obviously him having played for Dan in his days at IU because of how close that those two guys are. Yeah. But no, now it's different. And even to Peyton, I covered Peyton basically for the entirety of his Indianapolis Colts career. Peyton would see me at practice 2 or 3 times a week. Mm-hmm. So, now again, we're not drinking buddies, but he'd recognize me and we'd have a nice casual conversation. And the favorite Peyton story that I tell, Peyton is as big of a sports nerd as you watching this, the two of us talking about it. There was one day at camp that Peyton brings out a yellow legal pad and he's wanting to quiz the reporters. He goes, all right. He goes, I have on this list every other quarterback that's been on this roster since I've been here. This is like 2007, 2008, something along those lines. So it's been about 10 years. Seeing how many of them we could name, and that's right up my alley.
Oh,
so I'm like, so and so, and I got like this nodding like professor approval from him, and he's like, okay. And so again, are we traveling buddies? No. Yeah. But am I somebody that Peyton would recognize and say hello to? Yes.
Mm-hmm. Just thinking, MS Communications. Is this the home of Bob and Tom?
Bob and Tom is what is now iHeart. So they're 6161 Fall Creek.
Never been.
Not here.
Never been.
No.
But they are in Indianapolis.
Correct.
Does Peyton still have a home in Indianapolis?
I believe so. He has one in the area. Okay. Even though I think Denver really is his home.
Well, I'm working on Peyton Manning too.
Sure.
So if you can,
I don't have his phone number. You're on your own.
Didn't think so. All right.
Yep.
Your IHSAA affiliate. When did that come about? How did that come about?
So, the IHSA started producing other sports other than just what their television broadcasts were, really around 2010. So they've gone through a myriad of television contracts. Obviously now it's Bally Sports Indiana, but they produce a video feed for every state championship. There's a person behind the scenes that was very influential and still is at this point named Rick Vanderweilen, Hometown Sports that you referenced briefly. Rick is also not a full-time employee, not by any stretch of the imagination, because he's largely retired. But he's a consultant for the IHSAA, and he is a person really behind the IHSAA Champions Network and IHSATV.org. And he would produce state championships that were not getting covered by their television contract. So all 5 at the time, all 5 football state championships on TV, all 4 basketball state championship, girls and boys, on TV. The 4A baseball state championship on TV. That was about it. So Rick would come in and do the softball state finals, and I've started doing a couple of those games for him. He would do the baseball state finals up until the 4A championship game. I would do those for Rick. We would go do the volleyball state finals. We went and did the soccer state finals, and because I worked from 2009 to 2011. I worked for Hometown. I was the de facto play-by-play guy. In other words, Jerry Baker would be brought in to do some stuff. I would kind of handle the rest. And so that's where I learned volleyball. That's where I learned soccer. Mm-hmm. And I knew baseball and softball anyway. So that would, because of playing baseball, so I could easily translate and do that. So that's kind of where kind of the broad nature of my background would be. But my first full television state final, I 2009 did Monrovia and Lures in the 2A state championship game. First of 4 in a row for future NFL player Jalen Smith in that game. Then in the spring of 2010, I was a late addition. I had done radio for the network already, but I was a late addition to the television broadcast for the 1A and 2A state championship games. Bar Reeve and Bowman, I want to say, was 2010.
They did play them. If that's the
Yeah.
year, Barry's been up there a few times.
Yep, I've had Bar Reeve a bunch.
That might have been their first, though, and Bowman was a tough.
Yeah, 02 was the first against Rossville. I did that on radio.
Yes.
Did that game. Zane Bowman going off for Bar Reeve in that contest.
Great friend of mine's son.
Really?
Former neighbor. Yeah.
Wait, 37 in that game? Does that sound about right?
It's still a 1A state record, I believe, tied, but he's a Marine.
Is he really?
He is, out in the San Diego area.
He had the Marine haircut playing 20 years ago in that game, too.
Actually, as I said, he grew up as a neighbor.
Yeah.
In Lagodi.
Right, but right across the state line, right?
Well, he did whatever they had to do, and they went to Bar Reeve.
Right.
So, unfortunately, he got away from us.
Okay.
But Zane, sorry.
So anyway, and then the 2A game was Wheeler and Park Tudor. Dodie Farrell is a sophomore playing in those. Mm-hmm. And my thought is once I'm able to get my hands on something, and in terms of an event, I tend not to let it go. Like, that's going to be mine. And so every year, other than the pandemic year, I have broadcast at least one, if not two, from a television standpoint, state championships on TV. Usually I have done, sometimes I did the morning session on radio, the evening session on television, or I flipped those. I had a couple years where I did all 4 games. Mm-hmm. These days I tend to do 2 TV and maybe 1 radio, or 1 TV and 1 radio as assigned by the IHSA.
This has happened to me on more than one occasion. I'm guessing it's happened to you because you do back-to-back events and such.
Yep.
But the voice go out?
The voice, there's always one cold during the course of the year that affects my voice. Mm-hmm. And so it has never gone out. Well, I shouldn't say that. It went out for about a 4-day stretch when I was hosting talk shows and doing play-by-play. Mm-hmm. I remember that I had a week in like October of 2001. I told him, I said, listen, I've got play-by-play Friday and Saturday. I said, I can't host a talk show the rest of the week. I'm taking 3 days vocal rest, and just I have to. There are times when I power through. This year, it was early December that it hit me. There was one time in August of 19, it hit me, and I was sick 1 week, and I was fine doing the Colts preseason television on a Saturday. I basically did nothing for 2 days to be able to make it through that game, and I did. But then the requisite coughing after that fact completely shredded my voice, and I had to somehow make it through high school opening week on a Friday, Colts game on a Saturday, Indy 11 on a Sunday. Wow. I felt fine, sounded like crap, but I made it through. So yeah, and in terms of vocal preparation, I just show up and talk. They're like if I ever go to a concert, I'm not going to scream at a concert. Can't do it. Can't affect the moneymaker. Mm-hmm. Other than that, kind of just show up and start talking.
Yeah, that's tough when you're paid for your voice.
Right, yeah.
And to show up. But it sounds like you have, and still do, the flexibility to be able to call some of those shots. I'm not going to do anything for 3 days.
Right.
I can do this.
At that time 20 years ago, I was the program director and sports director for 95.9 in Franklin. And I basically said, I'm taking 3 days off from the show. We will either you can fill in, or we'll simply go to satellite programming. I said, my voice is gone at this point. I said, there's not somebody to replace me from a play-by-play standpoint this weekend. And so, hey, I'm going to take these 3 days off, step aside, and that way my voice will be ready by Friday, and largely it was.
So today you're vice president of IFC Network.
Correct.
So
yep.
Tell a little bit about IFC Network. Before you do that, I just popped in my head. So in the very beginning, I talked about, I think you must be probably one of the busiest broadcasters in the state of Indiana. Could you argue with that?
No. And as I tell people, busy equals paid.
Not always. Not in my case.
In our business.
Yeah.
And the place that I'm at, it tends to be.
Yeah.
So yeah, and again, I love what I do.
Right.
And I know that it provides for my family as well. And so there are some people that when they talk about being a broadcaster, I've taken this vow of poverty. Well, I didn't. Mm-hmm. I tell people, it's because I speak to colleges and high schools all the time. I said, in college, there's always these weed out classes. where they say, all right, turn to your left, turn to your right. One of you will not be here at the end of the semester.
Yeah.
We don't tend to have that in broadcasting. Weed out class is the money you make when you get your first job. Like when I was full-time at WNDE, full-time meant getting 30 hours a week at $6 an hour. Or the shift that I had at X103 was $8 an hour as a part-timer. Or doing a talk show for 6 months for free, which then led to me getting a job for $24,000 a year.
Yeah.
Big time bucks at that, but you make it work. If you're talented, you can make good money doing this. Also, get into sales. That helps tremendously from that standpoint as well.
Well, in my situation, my idea was to be in radio, right?
Sure.
Big market.
Yep.
Well, that never did happen. But I learned very quickly after marriage and a child that the wife has to sign up to it.
Right.
And she did. And fortunately, she had good paying jobs. But I wanted one of those too. You know that? and I wasn't hustling like you were, or even had those opportunities. So it's tough. And I know you were very fortunate, but you've worked and earned everything you've got. So tell me a little bit about the ISC network.
So ISC is very similar to what Hometown Sports was. So ISC is a cable channel. We're in about 50,000 homes across the state. We also produce for Comcast in both Indiana and Michigan. We also produce for MyIndy TV here in Indianapolis, and those broadcasting in about 1 million homes across the state. Website, app, iscsportsnetwork.com. High school sports, small college sports, professional sports. We have done boxing to boys volleyball to wrestling to most of the major sports that you see. We do a lot from terms of all-star events like the HBCA All-Star Game in Bar Reeve, the Hoosier Reunion Classic at the end of April, the Indiana-Kentucky game. So I was at Bedford on June 5th. I was in Owensboro on June 10th. And I'm sorry, folks, I did not drive through Lagodi this time. I drove through Lagodi to get to Owensboro. Last year, Lagodi was fine. Construction in Jasper and Huntingburg weren't. So I took what we jokingly call the Redneck Autobahn down I-69 and cut back through South Spencer to get to Owensboro last time. But this time of year, things slow down for us a little bit at ISC. The Indy 11 men are not a part of ISC. Indy 11 have a women's team now that we do broadcast on ISC. So I'll do that coming up on Sunday. We'll have the North-South Football All-Star Game coming up on July 15th. We've got a very busy July, and once we get to August, Katie bar the door. Events happen all the time.
So how do you determine on this ISC network which high school basketball games
you
do? Because we've got some interesting ones down in our area.
Sure. And the matter is where the sponsors want us to be. You know, and so you try to cast the biggest net. Frankly, I would love for us to add the Lagodi Bar Reeve game every year on ISC and give that a statewide audience, a statewide level of attention. The folks from Bar Reeve invited us down for the first boys game played in that building, which was December of 2020, which sadly was in the midst of the pandemic. And so, you know, it was still half full. But we came down and did that game just because we wanted to have that one kind of on record. And there could be some more stuff coming between us and Bar Reeve coming up, I think, in the near future. But no, if I can find the right sponsors, anybody watching wants us to come down and televise some Lagodi basketball, would be happy to have those conversations and do that, if not on a regular basis, at least a couple of big games a year. Because again, what I miss about back home is the level of passion for high school basketball and high school sports in general, especially high school basketball in that area, is unmatched in the state of it. There's nothing like Bar Reeve, Lagodi, the size of those two schools, and yet the 4,700 people at the JBA or the 3,500 at the Viking ship that they will play in front of, and obviously what North Davies is now kind of rolling with, and their great facility as well. Nothing matches that in the state of Indiana from a passion and just for regular season games. So I would absolutely love to come down and do more games in that neck of the woods.
Yeah. Well, a couple of years ago, you came down to interview me. And actually, in all fairness, he interviewed about 100 other people.
10, more like.
Oh, is that right? Yeah. But it had to do with the Lagodi Bar Reeve rivalry, a production that they were going to put together. And so it came to Jack Butcher Arena. I guess first time I met you, I would assume.
Correct.
Still waiting for it. Still waiting for this video on the Lagodi Bar Reeve rivalry. So still waiting for it.
So what happened to that is that we as ISC were paid by another company. The funny thing is, I literally talked about the other end of this about an hour before we started filming this. So the company wanted us to do 10. They paid for 2. The first one was the Carmel North Central tennis rivalry, which was the best rivalry you never heard of in terms. And then the other one was Lagodi and Bar Reeve. That finished product is sitting, waiting to be distributed. Somebody leaked that on YouTube a few months ago. So I will show Greg the link so he can see it. He is featured prominently. He and his broadcast partner, Coach Wagner, featured prominently in the documentary.
No, we're not.
Yes, they are.
But well, good. So it's still a possibility that
it will be released at some point in time. The company that paid us to produce them, I think, is still waiting on a sponsor, and hence they have kind of held those back. So that was actually filmed about 14 months ago.
Was it? Okay.
And it is yet to see the light of day officially, but there's a bootleg copy available on YouTube if you look it up.
But that's the way things happen, right?
Yeah.
You do things, you do a lot of work, and it never sees the light of day.
Correct. And when you are, so much of what we do on ISC, we are producing or being paid to produce, but we're being paid to produce in part because of our distribution capabilities. This is one of the rare events that we were like, hey, we want you to produce it because of your knowledge of the situation, your ability to interview folks for it, and then we'll distribute it. Okay. So we've been paid for it. We handed it to the other company, and they have yet to distribute it. That's where that is.
So there's been a very steady progression to where you are now in the 20 years in the broadcast business here in Indianapolis.
Yep.
What's next for Greg Rakestraw?
It's a good question, and I tell people this. I'm like, listen, if I'm doing the same thing 10 years from now that I'm doing right now, I am perfectly happy. I love
as busy as you are.
I love what I do every day. Absolutely. There's as my kids get older, I'm sure there's some things I'm going to scale back, a little bit. But those kids are expensive, and they require food and clothing and money. And I live in Broad Ripple. It's not exactly a cheap place to live. So if Dad can go out and work an extra shift on a Friday night, we're going to do it. And if I can do something I love and provide for my family, great. People ask about potentially going national. I don't know. Maybe from a play-by-play standpoint, there's certain things I would look at, but I love it here. Mom is up here now, so I don't get back to Lanesville as much as I do. But like, for example, we're talking about starting an athletic Hall of Fame at Lanesville, and I'm involved in that. I find reasons to go back, and sports is what has helped me stay connected to my hometown, despite the fact I've not lived there in 28 years, at this point, because I came to Indianapolis and frankly never left. And I love this place. So I feel like I've got 2 hometowns, or I'm a dual citizen of both Southern Indiana and Central Indiana. So if there are other opportunities that develop here in Indianapolis for me, great. But if not, I could see staying where I'm at, for a long time and be very happy there.
All right. We'll always give, as we wind down, kind of a forum. Anything we haven't talked about that you'd like to talk
airing of the
about?
grievances. I like that.
Yeah. So anything that you thought, well, I hope he asked this, or what have you, anything at all?
No, I've enjoyed our conversation. And again, just to the folks in Lagodi, Davies County, Martin County, all of Southern Indiana. While I no longer have the Southern Indiana accent, so to speak. Believe me, it's down here buried. You say things like 5 and 9 and Colts. I can't even say it the way I used to say it.
Yeah.
But no, while I love living in Central Indiana, I would not be the person that I am today if it were not for the Southern Indiana roots that I have. And so I always hope that when I am doing a state championship game, I hope that I am neutral. But I think I always bring a good deal of Southern Indiana knowledge and love and passion for those schools, such as the Lagodi Lions, when I am doing said games.
That brings up a point. You and I kind of went back and forth on message after the state finals. And that was, I thought he was great. I thought he was non-partial. I don't even know what game it was.
Yeah.
But no matter what it is, I don't care if it's national.
They're going to Tecumseh Central Catholic, by the way.
Is that what it was?
Referencing,
okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, how could you be so much for Tecumseh? Or how could you be so much for Central Catholic? I mean, You've got to hear that.
All the time. Yeah.
How do you react to that? Consider the source?
Water off a duck's back. You just let it go.
Yeah. You know you're not being partial because you don't have a partiality.
My thought would be this. If I was being tilted towards one side or the other, they'd stop asking me to do the games.
Sure.
And I've done over 200 state championships at this point. So I think we're okay.
Greg Rakestraw, thank you so much.
My pleasure, buddy.
I mean, to have me up here, this is just great, and to take your time. fresh off vacation, which I know you need another vacation.
As I tell people, it's not like I have a real job.
Yeah.
I get paid to go to ball games for a living.
Yeah.
Life's pretty good.
That life's pretty good. Greg Rakestraw, as I said, if you don't know the name or the face, well, you do now. You recognize everything about him now, and you'll see him all the time now. Now that you know who he is, but like I said, in my humble opinion, I don't know of a better sports broadcaster than Greg Rakestraw, and I appreciate the time once again.
Well, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that.
We hope you enjoyed it. This is, again, a little sidebar to our Getting to Know Your Indiana Neighbor. We'll be back home shortly and do some local folks again. I can tell you, though, who we've got coming up shortly, and that's Bob Lovell. Going to have Bob Lovell and Walt Ferber. Walt Ferber just retired after 42 years from the said WITZ. We're going to meet with him this week. So we've got a couple of more in this series that we're anxious to get to. Then we'll be back home and get our local heroes. So we hope you've enjoyed this session of Getting to Know Your Indiana Neighbor broadcaster. Thank you so much.